This video is over lesson 104, solving quadratic equations by completing the square. So ladies and gentlemen, we've learned that if we have a binomial squared, that equals the first term squared plus double the product plus the second term squared. Now if we compare this to our typical standard form of a trinomial, our standard trinomial is ax squared plus bx plus c. So the relationship here is that in particular we want a to be 1. We don't want to have to worry about it. So that's going to be important a little bit when we come to actually solving the quadratic equations. You want a to be 1. Now b, we see, equals 2m. Therefore, m must equal b divided by 2. That also is going to be important in just a moment. And then finally, we can see that c then, our constant, must be whatever m is squared. So then keep in mind that m is the thing that we're adding with x. So m is the thing we're adding with x. So one thing that we're going to focus on before we get to the actual solving is completing the square. So completing the square, we're going to consider sorry, I lost my page here. We are going to consider how to turn something back into a square instead of a trinomial. So for example, let's say that I have x squared plus 10x. So the question here is, what do we need in order to turn this back into a perfect square? So the square of something. And the key here, ladies and gentlemen, is what we just did in red, that we can find this m by taking whatever b is, the coefficient of x. We can find m by taking b and dividing it by 2. So 10 is my number here. Divide that by 2, and so this must be plus 5. So in order to find my constant c, we're going to take that m and square it. So 5 squared is 25. And that completes the square. Plus 25 completes the square. Let's try another one. So this time x squared plus 14x. So what do we need to complete this square? Well, we're going to take this number right here and divide it by 2. So 14 divided by 2 is 7. And then if we square it, we get the constant. So 7 squared is 49. Let's say I have x squared plus 2x. So to complete the square, we divide this by 2. So 2 divided by 2 is 1. And then we square it. Well, 1 squared is still just 1. Here, if I want to complete the square, we're going to, again, take this number divided by 2. So 5 divided by 2 would be 2.5. And then if we square it, we get 6.25. Let's say I have x squared minus 16x. So if we divide this by 2, a negative 16 divided by 2 would be a negative 8. But when I square a negative 8, I get a positive 64. And let's do one more for good measure. Let's say I had x squared minus 20x. So a negative 20 divided by 2 would be a negative 10. And then if I square a negative 10, I get a positive 100. And that is completing the square. Now remember, in the end, we should be able to turn these back into a binomial squared. So if you remember that divided by 2 number, so 14 divided by 2 is 7, this must be x plus 7. This here, 2 divided by 2 is 1, so this must be x plus 1 squared. Here, 5 divided by 2 is 2.5, so this must be x plus 2.5 squared. Here, this is negative 16 divided by 2, so this must be x minus 8 squared. And then finally down here, negative 20 divided by 2 is negative 10, so this must be x minus 10 squared. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is completing the square. So, with that being said, let's take a look now at doing some solving. And again, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to ask you to go ahead and open up your books to page 702, and we're going to look at the practice problems. Now, A practices what we were just talking about. So if I have x squared plus 24x then to complete this square, I need to consider, all right, 24 divided by what, or divided by 2 is what? So 24 divided by 2 is 12. And then remember that the constant will be that number squared. So 12 squared is 144. That is the completed square. So the problem did not ask us to turn it into a binomial, the square of a binomial. So that's it. That is the completed perfect square. B, now we're going to solve by completing the square. So, ladies and gentlemen, what we're going to do is we actually want to get this into a form where it is basically x squared plus bx equals whatever number it needs to equal. That's going to be our starting goal here. Well, it turns out this one's all set. We are all set here. And then what we're going to do is we're going to complete the square. So if we have an x squared plus 2x, what would complete this square? Well, remember, we take this number divided by 2 and then square it. So 2 divided by 2 is 1. Squared would still be 1. Now here's the deal though. We just added 1 to this side. So in order to balance that out, I need to go ahead and add 1 to the other side. So we're going to add 1 to both sides. This 1 completes the square, and that 1 just balances out the equation, so it's still equal. From here, we can go ahead and change this into a square of a binomial. So remember, 2 divided by 2 is 1, so this is really x plus 1 squared. Now on the other side of the equation, 8 plus 1 is 9. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we can solve by following our SAT map. So there's nothing outside of the parentheses to take care of, so now I'm going to take care of that exponent. So I'm going to take the square root of both sides. And remember, this needs to be the true square root. So plus or minus 3. And so now the square root and the square will cancel, leaving me with just x plus 1. And then over here, this will be plus or minus, oops, I got ahead of myself, didn't I? That was supposed to be a 9. And then there's my 3. Got ahead of myself. So now if we subtract 1 from both sides, x therefore equals, well, if this is a positive 3 minus 1, that'd be a positive 2. It was a negative 3 minus 1, it would be a negative 4. So x equals a positive 2 or a negative 4. So what happened here is we completed the square, we added 1 to both sides. We changed this into a square of a binomial, which then allows us to take the square root of both sides, simplify, solve, we've got our answer. And the key to this is we want to turn this into x squared plus bx equals some number. All right, I'm going to flip over here and let's take a look at letter C. So for letter C, I have x squared minus 14x equals 15. So again, we need this to be of the form x squared plus bx equals some number. Well, it's all set. So now we're ready to complete the square. X squared minus 14x. So if I take my negative 14 divided by 2, that'd be a negative 7, which then squared is 49. Well, if I add 49 to one side, I need to add 49 to the other side. Over here, remember 14 divided by 2 is a negative 7. So this is x minus 7 squared. And on the other side, if we add 15, I'm going to get 64. Now to cancel out the square, I'm going to take the square root of both sides. Remember, it's a true square root, so we're going to have a plus minus. And so that'll make just x minus 7 equals plus or minus 8. Add 7 to both sides. So x equals, well, if it's a positive 7 plus 7, that'll be 15. Or if it's a negative 7 plus 7, that'll be 0. So 15 or 0. Oh, I'm sorry. What was I doing there? Negative 8 plus 7. Where did I get a 7 from? I don't know. Negative 1. There we go. 15 or negative 1. I had 7's stuck in my head. My apologies for that. So negative 8 plus 7 would be a negative 1. There we go. D. We're starting with 3x squared plus 24x equals a negative 27. And we need this to start off in the form of x squared plus bx equals whatever number it needs to equal. Well, we don't have that this time, because this time we don't have just an x squared, we have a 3x squared. However, we do have our bx and we do have some number over here. So I'm going to get rid of that 3 by dividing both sides by 3. Here the 3 will distribute on the entire side, and so they'll leave me with an x squared plus 8x, and on the other side I have a negative 9. Now we're going to complete the square. So x squared plus 8x, so now if I divide that by 2, I'd get 4, which then squared is 16. So we are adding 16 to both sides. Over here, remember this is going to be x plus 4 squared, and negative 9 plus 16 is 7. So x plus 4, take the square root, and on the other side, true square root, plus or minus. And now if we simplify, I get x plus 4. And on the other side, plus or minus, well, square root of 7 doesn't have a nice answer, so we're going to leave it, radical 7. So if we subtract 4 on both sides, x therefore is a negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 7. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is my exact answer. Now I can find an approximate answer if I want to. And remember, we're going to round this off to 6 digits if we need to. So if I've got my calculator here, I'm going to type it in just like it says, negative 4 plus square root of 7. Hit enter. And so that's going to be approximately negative 1.354. And now to find the minus, remember, hit second enter. Oops, I had it a little too fast. There we go. Second enter, and come back to the minus, or the plus, and change it to a minus. And so that'll be a negative 6.646. E, I have a 2x squared plus 6x equals a negative 6. So again, I don't have that quite in the right form. I need to divide both sides by 2. And so therefore x squared plus 3x equals a negative 3. Completing the square. So if I take a 3 and divide it by 2, I get 1.5, which then squared would be 2.25. So we're adding 2.25 to both sides. So over here, this will be x plus 1.5 squared. And then over here, this will be a negative 0.75. Then if we take a square root of both sides, remember true square root, we're going to end up with a square root of a negative, which means this has no real solution. Oops, sorry, gotta move that up there a little bit. There we go. No real solution. Finally, F. The base of a parallelogram is 8 centimeters more than its height. If the total area of the parallelogram is 20 square centimeters, what are the dimensions of the parallelogram? So, F. We know that area of a parallelogram is base times height. So the base of the parallelogram is 8 centimeters more than its height. So the base is height plus 8. And then the height is just itself. And together, that's going to make 20 square centimeters. So if we distribute that in, h squared plus 8h equals 20. And now if we solve this by completing the square, h squared plus 8h, well, 8 divided by 2 is 4, which squared is 16. So this will be h plus 4 squared equals 36. And then if I take a square root of both sides, true square root, don't forget your plus minus. Therefore, and I'm going to come up here to finish, h plus 4 must equal plus or minus 6. Subtract 4 from both sides, and h equals, well, positive 6 minus 4 would be 2, or a negative 6 minus 4 would be negative 10. So which one of those actually makes sense for a height? Well, obviously not a negative length for the height. So therefore, h must equal 2 centimeters, and then if the base is h plus 8, well, that's 2 plus 8, which is 10 centimeters. So once again, ladies and gentlemen, in real world problems, sometimes we have to throw out a value that just doesn't make sense in the real world. And that is our lesson.